Why else would David Hoyt be going? That's where you get the big, deep pockets.
Yeah, you're right. That is true.
No,
that is true. Treasure chests full of gold and such.
90% of their funding originally came.
No, in fact, Jim's not at a Renaissance fair right now. He went to space camp.
Oh.
Yeah, so he's in one of those gyroscoping space camp things.
Jim could never fit into one of those gyros.
Oh,
I forgot we're live.
We're live.
Hey.
Across the country. As always, I am your host, Donald Kendall, and joining us today, we have Isaac Orr, Policy Fellow at the Center of the American Experiment. How are you, good sir?
I am present.
Man, I almost forgot your title and organization. It's been like 2 weeks since I've seen you, man.
Right, yeah, you can't say research fellow at the Heartland Institute anymore, so it's like messing with your mind.
Policy Fellow, I got that right, though, but the one that I probably won't get right is Editorial Director Justin Haskins. Did I get that right finally?
Sure. I think we should just change my title to whatever you think it is.
Is that not what it is? I'm
not even going to tell you anymore. It's insulting. I shouldn't have to tell you. You should know my title. If you don't know it and you don't feel confident in it, then
to my left, I've got producer extraordinaire Andy Singer.
Hey folks, finally got a mic. Happy to be on the show.
Yeah, we've upgraded. He's got a microphone. Maybe he'll get a camera
one day.
Your first task, good sir, is to look up Justin's actual title because I'm pretty sure I got it right. Not joining us is Jim Lakely. Like I said, he's at Space Camp. He should be here next week. No, actually, next week, I think he'll be at the ICC 13 in Washington, D.C.
July 25th, ladies and gentlemen, Washington, D.C., the Trump International Hotel.
Right. So I think, Justin, are you going to be there?
I'm not.
No?
What?
Nope, I'm not going to be there.
The arch enemy of the Green New Deal?
It looked like I was going to be there, and I'm not going to be there. I'm sorry.
They kicked you to the curb. They kicked you to the curb.
Yeah, kind of.
All right.
We don't need to get into the inside baseball details of exactly what happened, but all the audience needs to know is that I won't be there.
Oh,
Justin trash bins taken out to the curb.
Anyways, Andy might be able to confirm this. We're going to be like live streaming this or something, right?
We will be live streaming the entire conference.
All right. Yeah. So
if you're on Twitter, Facebook, you'll hear all about it.
Yeah. So if you're not in the area to be able to go to the 13th International Conference on Climate Change, you will be able to watch it if you just go to our website, heartland.org, or maybe our YouTube page, etc.
You know what would have been cool, and maybe we can do this next year for ICC. We should have gone to ICC and just done like a live show.
So actually, we do now have the equipment to pull that kind of thing off, and that is in the very near future.
We should totally do that next year.
Yeah,
all right.
That would have been awesome.
Recently.
All right, we will do that for sure. So we're going to be talking about socialism, a little modern monetary theory. We're going to get into some healthcare, a little bit of energy stuff here as it relates to socialism. But before I mention that, I do want to say, because primarily our audience is all listening through iTunes and Spotify and SoundCloud and all that. But if you want to see our beautiful faces, we are now live streaming this on YouTube if you want to see the faces behind the voices. That works for some of us, but Isaac's there too. So
creeping everybody out.
Isaac, have we talked to you since you were at the White House?
No, I don't think so.
I don't think he's allowed to tell us what happened at the White House.
So that was dope. So I was probably 15 feet away from POTUS while he was making the speech. Nice. As he walked out, I could have shook his hand, but I chickened out. I just wanted to. I totally chickened because he wasn't doing it. He wasn't like talking to anybody on the way out, and like I feel like
you missed your opportunity, man.
I am kicking myself, everyone.
Yeah.
But it was really cool. I did get to shake hands with Andrew Wheeler, who's the EPA administrator, and got my picture taken with him, and that way I could make that my Twitter profile picture to show everyone back home that, like, all right, renewable energy advocates, I'm coming for you. And
Andrew Wheeler.
Yeah, we're doing it. We're gonna get you. We're gonna repeal the Clean Power Plan, and you're gonna cry. But no, it was good because I told him that our study, doubling down on failure, found that the ACE rule would save Minnesota $7.5 billion through 2050, and he was really excited about that. So he called his staffer over and said, "Hey, get this guy's information." And the next day, I got an email from the staffer that said, "Hey, I'm printing the study out for the administrator." Yeah, so that's cool. I haven't heard anything back yet, so I got to follow up. But that was very neat.
Very cool. So how long you were just there the one day?
Yeah.
All right. Very cool.
You didn't do any sightseeing or anything like that?
It's a swamp. What is there to see?
Isaac, the thing that we were talking about, the item that you were working on, are you going to be able to tease that on this episode, or do we have to wait? And don't do it now if the answer is yes.
Oh, yeah, we can talk about it.
All right. I do want to bring that up because Justin and I were just talking about this like a week ago. So when we get into the energy stuff, I do want to bring that up. So very good stuff.
Okay.
So 200th episode. So the only thing that I could so inside context here, the reason why there wasn't a live episode last week was because Justin and I were at the Western Conservative Summit in Denver. Justin was on the main stage. He and I did a breakout session talking about socialism, did some radio interviews, got to meet a whole lot of liberty-loving people. But because we were out, we had to pre-record an episode. So that's we did the first In the Tank deep dive episode with Lenny Jarrett, a policy expert when it comes to education here at the Heartland Institute. So we did a full hour-long episode just talking about everything that's under the education umbrella. So if you're interested in that, check it out. Last week's episode. So I got back from
Jesse, this
Denver.
is Isaac Gore, and I'm just calling to confirm my my time.
Can you mute Isaac?
2409 Colfax Avenue South.
Oh my gosh!
Boy.
Look at this. This is insane. So that perfectly that perfectly shows the amount of prep that we had going into this episode. Got back kind of midweek this week, just in the same deal. So kind of putting this episode together on the fly, but it is the 200th episode. So I want to show off this book, which is what Justin and I were talking about. It is authored by Justin himself. This was kind of the backbone of the presentation that we did at Western Conservative Summit. And because this is our 200th episode, we want to give away a few copies of this. So let's just say the first 5 people that email us at inthethankpodcast@gmail.com will get their very own copy of Socialism is Evil. So yeah, that'll be our little 200th episode little gift giveaway.
Wait, is today episode 200?
Yeah.
Yeah, if you weren't on the phone making appointments, you would know that.
Isaac, did the appointment come through? Did you?
Yeah, how did the
I tried to mute my microphone. I pushed mute. Sorry. No, the light was blinking, so I don't know why that happened. But
whatever.
Yeah, I have a leaky water heater, so the plumber's coming to fix that. So sorry.
See, we're just working stiffs over here. It's not like we're
This is a blue collar podcast.
This is a very blue collar podcast. Literally have a blue collar. Anyways. So before we get to that, because I do want to kind of talk about our experience in Denver and the kind of the speech and stuff like that, give a little behind the scenes. I do want to tease once more the podcast that I did, In the Tank deep dive with Lenny Jarrett on education. And a perfect thing that I came across here, this is an article from the Freedom Foundation, and it's National Education Association is not about education. So it basically talks about how in early July, 6,000 of the most ardent union activists of the NEA assembled to vote on the business of the organization. Delegates agreed to commit NEA resources to causes like advocating for abortion, advancing the theory of white fragility, lobbying/protesting on behalf of immigrant justice, including decriminalizing border crossing, training educators to be advisors to help create student gender sexuality alliance clubs, and lobbying to permit civil rights complaints about based on gender identity. They also voted down a resolution to reaffirm their focus on education. So this ties perfectly into what Lenny and I were talking about, where it was, what led to the whole Janus ruling and stuff like that, and using union dues to push political agendas and stuff like that, and not actually to help student education or anything like that. So I thought this was a perfect article, and it ties perfectly into that discussion that I had with Lenny and the power of the teachers unions and everything like that. So check out that episode. It's 199. But yeah, let's talk about our trip, Justin. So Western Conservative Summit. You have never been there before, correct?
No.
Yeah, same with me. Justin and I got to do a little breakout session in a room that eventually, I don't know if we want to tell that whole story, but we did have a full room, standing room only in the back.
Standing room only. That's right. 120 people probably showed up for our little presentation. That was great.
Right. And then prior to that, just prior, in fact, it was like really cutting it close. Justin was on the main stage talking about socialism. So, Justin, what's your experience with the whole thing? Did you enjoy your trip out to Denver?
Yeah, it was great. It was a lot of fun. Western Conservative Summit is interesting. If you're not from that part of the country, it's in Denver, Colorado. If you're not from that area, from the West, you may not be too familiar with it, but it's basically the largest conservative conference outside of Washington, D.C. and maybe New York or something like that. West of New York City, for the most part, this is the largest conservative conference in America. And so you get people from all over the West, from California, but especially from the Mountain West states. So lots of people were there from Colorado, from Wyoming, the Dakotas, that whole area. A lot of people came out. It was a lot of fun. We met a lot of great people. We gave some great information at our presentation, which was so much fun. I mean, I think that was maybe the most fun of any presentation I've ever given in my whole life. It was a lot of fun. Donnie and I did about an hour and a half on the stage. We were only supposed to do about 50 minutes or so going into it. That was our plan. And we ended up doing an hour and a half. And we had questions coming to us left and right. And it turned into almost like a borderline stand-up routine. So Isaac would be very pleased. And it was a lot of fun. I mean, it was great. The audience was super into it. So a lot of good questions. I enjoyed it a lot. It was great.
I like stayed up the night before to actually have my like note cards and stuff like that if I needed like a crutch to lean on, but it went like so far in like this other direction. I just like threw away the script and we just kind of freestyled the whole thing, and it went as good as I could have imagined.
We are never planning again. Days of planning are over. Our new strategy is to show up with no plan and just roll the dice and see what happens, because it worked out so well this time. Yeah, we are never preparing ever again.
Yeah, it's going to be snake eyes next time. Like, you rolled 2 6s, but next time.
Very possibly, but until that happens, that's what we're rolling with.
Okay. Yeah, we over prepped for LibertyCon, and it went really well. Don't get me wrong; that speech went fantastic. And then this time around, like, we prepared. I wrote my speech out and stuff like that. That's why it was probably so fresh in my head and stuff. But we did not stick to the format. That's for sure. We went an hour and a half. I was like, if you need to just like shut off our mics, kick us out of the room, just feel free. But then the reception afterwards was fantastic. We had like a dozen or so people coming up, kind of asking us more questions. I think we were like basically out of the books before we even got back to the booth, because we kind of we given away this book here. Again, if you want a copy, email us at inthetankpodcast@gmail.com. But I mean, we can get into some of the substance of it, because in reality, I did a lot of this prep in the last 2 weeks leading up to it. We knew that we wanted to have a whole big section on modern monetary theory, so I did a ton of reading on that in the past 2 weeks. But maybe, Justin, if you want to just give a little kind of spiel about what your main stage speech was all about.
Yeah, so the main stage speech, so the theme of the conference this year was the First Amendment, and specifically there was a heavy focus on religious liberty as it relates to the First Amendment. So I talked, my main stage presentation was about socialism and how it reacts, how it interacts with religious liberty, and whether you can have religious liberty and have socialism. That was the primary focus of the presentation. And so I talked a little bit about the history of that and the ideology behind socialism, and why in reality you can't have not just religious liberty, but really any kind of moral disagreements within socialism unless you have the majority imposing its will on the minority in society. That's the only way socialism works. So the classic example of that, there's all sorts of healthcare related examples: physician assisted suicide, abortion, contraception, whatever your views are on those things. The reality is that if you have a single payer healthcare system, you can only have one option. Either you pay for people's abortions or you don't. Either you pay for people's contraception or you don't. Either you pay for physician assisted suicide or you don't. And so whatever side on that issue you fall on, the reality is you have no choices. So the will of the majority in a democratic socialist society, the will of the majority is imposed on you as a minority, regardless of what your view is on those particular things. And that's true across the board, not just on healthcare related issues, but on all kinds of different things. Think about education. What did they teach your kids? How do they make that decision? Well, they make that decision based on whatever the majority wants. And if the majority thinks it's a good idea to teach your kids XYZ, and you think that that's immoral, that's wrong, you don't want your kids to learn that, too bad. That's how socialism works. So I got into a lot of that. That was the primary focus of the presentation, and we got a lot of really positive feedback to it. And then in our workshop session that we did together, we touched on that a little bit, but we touched on all sorts of other things as it relates to socialism. We got into great detail on stuff. My only regret is that we didn't have it recorded, because there was so much good information there. But yeah, I mean, there's just so much to talk about with socialism right now, and people are really excited about that topic. So it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, it was fantastic. Again, I think our message was very well received. One of the things that we did touch on a lot was obviously the Green New Deal. I mean, obviously being from the Heartland Institute, we talk a lot about energy and environment policy, and what's better to exemplify the left's proposals than the Green New Deal. So we did the speech. We talked about that and kind of what we thought are the true intentions behind the Green New Deal, and how if they really thought that this was a plan to save the planet, you've probably heard us say this in varying ways multiple times, but whatever, that if they really wanted to save the planet, they really thought this was going to save the planet, then why would they spend $1 or waste a minute trying to convince us to have all of the other aspects of the Green New Deal in there, including, Medicare for all, free college, jobs guarantees, the housing stuff, all of that, whatever. So we talked about that. And then it was that night that I came across this article titled AOC's Chief of Staff Admits the Green New Deal is not about climate change. So I'm not even going to try to pronounce the Chief of Staff's name, but basically she or he, I don't know.
Oh man,
I think it's a he, but I could be wrong.
It's a he.
He says,
judging from the pronouns that were used.
Okay, all right. It says the interesting thing about the Green New Deal is that it wasn't originally a climate thing at all. They said to Inslee's climate director, and this is according to a Washington Post reporter who attended the meeting. It says, do you guys think of it as a climate change thing? Because we really think of it as a how do you change the entire economy thing. So it was just confirmation that this was, in fact, the whole agenda behind the Green New Deal. I'm not surprised. Justin, I assume you aren't. Isaac, what do you think about this kind of admittance?
No, I mean, I think that it's really great. I love the fact that they're being so honest about it, because you've had people like Naomi, what's
Klein?
her last? No, Oriskis.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
That's another one. Yep.
Yeah. So she's been saying this for a while, but nobody really took it seriously. Like, I think that it's not that we haven't known this or suspected this for a very long time. Like, the whole idea of the Greens are just watermelons. They're green on the outside, but red on the inside is something that conservatives and libertarians have talked about for a really long time. But we were never taken seriously. We were always like, oh yeah, whatever. You're just paid off by the fossil fuel companies, blah, 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 blah. And to have AOC's chief of staff say this and for it to be reported in the Washington Post
right,
is really good. I think it's good for the country because it brings a level of transparency that was not available before. And who knows, like, even if we could print this verbatim and people would still be like, yeah, right. You're just this coke wing thing. But I think we're finally going to start making traction, especially talking about just the absolute abject disaster that the Green New Deal would have for us as a society.
Yeah, not only as us as a society, but on the environment itself.
Yes,
I mean, we've talked about how environmentally toxic these ideas are, especially when I think the Green New Deal actually wasn't so harsh on nuclear power. Am I confusing that with something, or is that the case?
No, it was.
Okay.
It wasn't like they were saying they needed to close it necessarily, but it did not promote nuclear as a way of achieving decarbonization.
In the frequently asked questions sheet that was put out there on accident or whatever, that was one of the things they brought up, and they basically said, no, we're not going to be using nuclear power in order to make this transition. So Isaac is right. I don't think they said they were going to close nuclear power plants down. I think it was more like, we're not going to use that. We want wind and solar. That's what they want, wind and solar.
We want wind and solar because they won't work.
That's it. But there's been so many like iterations of the Green New Deal already that nobody really knows what's in it. That's why we have to pass it in order to find out what's in it.
Great Nancy Pelosi quote. You're always quoting Nancy Pelosi. What's with that?
Yeah.
BFFs.
So modern
we have the same plastic surgeon.
All right.
So, Justin, you basically allowed me to kind of do my own little monologue / rant on modern monetary theory, because obviously that is, between that and nuclear power, these are like my two main interests. And that was kind of the other thing that we thought the Green New Deal really kind of showed their hand, that they're just using this as an excuse to push through their socialist agenda. But on the other hand, I think it really kind of showed what their thoughts are about like how they're going to pay for all of this stuff. And we're going to get to that a little bit. You have a Kamala Harris article that talks specifically about Medicare for all, but we'll get to that. And what I think is what they really have behind, the real thinkers, the academics, quote unquote, behind some of these politicians, what they actually are pushing for is a world where we can embrace the ideas of modern monetary theory. And if you haven't heard me talk about this, go look up past episodes. I'll give a brief synopsis of the theory itself. It's basically that the United States has a monopoly on the U.S. currency, and because of that, we can't go in default. So this is what they believe, not me. And because of that, debt and deficits don't really matter. That we can fund all of these programs and stuff like that without having to resort to taxing. And basically taxing under this system is just a way to manipulate society in one way or the other, or curb inflation. So I was doing a whole lot of research in preparation for the speech on this topic, because I knew that I was going to do the heavy lifting on this part of the speech. So I thought the best source to get information was to read the actual socialists' essays on this stuff, right? So I found a couple, and I sent these to you, Justin. I don't know if you ever got around to reading them, but the first one that I came across, both of them actually, were in Jacobin magazine, which is just like a flat out socialist magazine. They don't try to hide it. I'm pretty sure they're just a flat out socialist, right? So there was an essay by Doug Henwood, and it was basically an article that was dismissing modern monetary theory as like a fanciful system to basically end around the work of imposing socialism politically. And basically, like, why convince people that socialism is a good idea when you could just do modern monetary theory? So he's pretty dismissive of the concept and critical of it. But in response to that, there was several people responded to that. And so the one that I have in front of me is from Pavlina Cherneva, who is a program director and associate professor of economics at Bard College and a research associate at the Levi Economics Institute. She's a big champion of modern monetary theory. And generally, her response was terrible. It pretty much dismisses all of Henwood's concerns. But the admissions in this response are unbelievable. And this was kind of some of the stuff that I was trying to send to you. But just check this out. It says, so this is her speaking, says, what I got from the piece is the following. This is in reference to Henwood's criticism of modern monetary theory. It says, Henwood wants to wage class struggle via fiscal policy and specifically tax policy. Worse, he wants to expropriate the wealth of the rich by making it more digestible for them. He says that rich people would have a lot harder time complaining about their money being taken to educate kids and to save the planet than if it was taken because they were too rich, which sounds very much like, quote unquote, sorry to be taking your money, but we really, really need it. Don't you agree? What a class war, this person says. It says, Henwood does not acknowledge that one of the most effective ways of engaging in the struggle is to render the wealthy obsolete, as in we will stop pretending that we need them to pay for a good society. In a world with a sovereign currency and modern monetary and fiscal institutions, we never really did, and we sure don't now. So they're basically trying to say we don't need to tax the rich. We could just print money at no end. And it says, for the record, modern monetary theory, and this is their words. That's what I really want to get across. We're not reading tea leaves or anything like that or interpreting stuff or trying to read between the lines. This is what they're writing. For the record, modern monetary theory has always argued for taxing the wealthy to address the problems of inequality and political power. So basically, they don't need your tax revenue. They just want to tax you purely for punitive reasons. Isn't that like insane?
Yes, absolutely. But people are buying into this, and I don't know, just some of the arguments that I see on my Facebook page. I mean, they're posting Jacobin magazine, so we all know that the arguments aren't good. But it's interesting to see that people that I actually know think this, and some people just think that billionaires, as a noun, are immoral. Like the fact that anyone could have $1 billion is just a travesty to them. So I said, well, what about J.K. Rowling? You know, no, is she an evil person?
Yeah.
And
she needs to be taxed just because she's too wealthy, according to these people.
Well, it's just, they say that it's not only that, I don't think that they need that much money. It's like they are bad people.
Well, wait until I get to this other quote because
okay. Sorry.
No, it gets even crazier.
Yeah.
So the last quote that I'm going to read of this Sharnarev is that says that I would say that Henwood, like other, in quotes, tax the rich to pay for progress lefties, which I think she should just lower that down to trap lefties, which I think would be funny, is tethered to the wealthy by an imaginary umbilical cord that holds the progressive agenda hostage to its oppressors. To me, this is the definition of a self-induced paralysis. So they believe that basically the only thing that's holding them back from being able to enact their socialist agenda is this myth that we need to tax the rich to pay for it. So this stuff is like so bizarre. She says it's time to cut the cord, blah, 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 blah. But then L. Randall Wray, who is also a big champion of this modern monetary theory. He's another economics professor at Bard College. His response to the Henwood article was pretty identical to the one that I just read, but some of his quotes get even more ridiculous. So he basically says that we have to stop pretending like money grows on the rich. And then he says, I do like high taxes on high income and high wealth. I have argued they should be set as high as to be confiscatory. God, I can't say that. Confiscate a Tory. Yeah, whatever. He says not at a marginal income tax rate of 70%, but at 99%, or even 125%, or 1,000%. Take it all. This is a direct quote from him. He basically says that because the rich are able to shelter their wealth and stuff like that, that you have to make the tax rate even higher than 100% to get around that, which is so bizarre. And he says, so what will we do with the tax revenue? Burn it. Uncle Sam doesn't need your money. So again, this is
oh man.
Proper economics there.
yeah. Andy's just looking at me with the perfect response, which is just slack-jawed and just astounded because, yeah, this is what they believe. They don't need the rich. They could just print as much money. The only reason that they would tax the rich is because, in their mind, wealth is inherently evil and needs to be taken from them.
But they want
This is what they believe.
So like they think the wealth is evil, but they also want the wealth for themselves.
They want fairness, sir. They want
Oh.
fairness. So then this was kind of the other theme, I guess, of our speech, was that the idea that like socialism manifests itself differently, like basically every generation. So you got like the Karl Marx and the Soviet Union, where it's just like a flat out confiscation of the means of production and stuff like that, right? But then you can go into like the 80s in Sweden, when their big end around was to kind of shift ownership of industry from private to public, was wage earners funds. So it was basically a profit that came from these corporations were shifted into these funds that were used to buy shares in the company. So eventually it would shift over ownership.
The shares would be given to the workers.
Yeah. And then that resulted in basically like the biggest demonstrations in Sweden history. So they eventually got rid of that. But it is our theory that modern monetary theory is their track for the 21st century. This is the way that they're going to impose their vision of socialism on this country. And basically, we're here to call them out on it before it gets too big. And the big benefit when we catch it this early is it's not like political language injected into this to make it sellable to the public yet. You've got these people like this Pavlina Sharneva and who's the Stephanie Kelton and L. Randall Ray, who are just really explicit about their aims for this stuff. So this is like the perfect part to kind of get all that information. This is the perfect time for it.
Yeah, it's really important because historically, socialism has always been understood as collective ownership of property. You have to actually own property, confiscate property, take property away. And what they're calling for here does not require them confiscating any property at all. You don't even need to, because historically also, if you look at some free market economists, Austrian economics, that sort of thing, they would talk about how you can have quasi-socialism by just the regulatory schemes that are put into place by various governments, right? You can just control the economy through regulations, but this doesn't even require that either. It does to keep inflation in check, but it doesn't to actually control the economy. All they have to do here is pump money into the industries they like. Government printed money. They just print the money and then pump it into the industries they like, and then drive the businesses they don't like out of business. So they just they control the entire economy by just printing money and then putting it in the places where they want it. And then you use taxes as a way to punish people who are perceived to be bad. So you can print a bunch of money. So in fossil, for instance, if you're talking about energy, right, you print a bunch of money and you give it to solar and wind companies. And then you tax fossil fuel companies, not because you need the money, but because you hate fossil fuel companies. They're really bad for the world. And so you destroy them. So you destroy them with taxes. You don't even need to increase regulations at all. And you don't need to take any of their property. You just drive them out of business by increasing their taxes and then pumping a ton of government printed money into the industries you like. And now you haven't actually, you don't have any government ownership of property. You don't need it. Because if you are the one that has the money, if you're the one controlling the money, if you're basically a marketplace of one and you decide where all the money goes, now you actually control everything without actually having to physically own anything. It's a really, it's a genius system in that sense. It's a ridiculous system in every other sense, but in that sense, it's a genius system because it allows you to control the economy without actually owning the property. And so they can disavow this idea of socialism, in fact, in the future. They might actually be able to say, look, this isn't socialism. We're not owning anything here.
Right.
But in reality, that's exactly what it is.
Yeah, it's all about central planning.
It's exactly right. It's a central, it's all about shifting the power to the masterminds in Washington, D.C. that are pulling all the levers and twisting all the knobs and controlling every aspect of the economy.
Yeah, it's so bizarre. There's even some things in here. I was trying to find the specific article that I was reading, but there was another instance where they were saying that, basically they admit like they don't need to tax anyone under this system. They could just print all the money. And obviously anyone that's got a third grade degree will know that that'll end up resulting in tons of inflation and stuff like that. But they basically said that even if they didn't have inflation, they would still tax, because that would force people to stay with the US currency and not go to some type of cryptocurrency and stuff like that. So this has just got central planning, top-down governance written all over it.
And one thing too, just touching on the thing that you just mentioned, you wouldn't have to raise taxes. I was saying this to Donnie earlier. The really interesting thing about this is not only could you say, well, we don't have to raise taxes, you could actually say we're going to cut taxes.
Right.
For most people, you could say we're going to cut taxes. We're going to cut taxes for everybody except for the people we don't like. We're going to raise their taxes, but we're going to cut taxes for everybody, because again, if you believe that the economy is driven by the money that you're printing, the taxes don't really matter.
Right.
The taxes are purely there as like a political prop and a way to punish people you don't like. That's all it is. It's not about raising revenues.
And to control inflation, right? Like,
yeah.
That's the other thing.
A little bit, yes.
Well,
although they seem to think that they can control the inflation through regulations predominantly. And price controls and stuff like that.
Yeah, so like the raising taxes rates to stifle inflation is basically to induce a recession, right?
Yes.
So, but Stephanie Kelton, and I bring her up a lot because she's probably the most kind of front face on this whole idea. She was the senior economic advisor of Bernie Sanders' political campaign, and she was also, I always forget this one,
chief economist for the Senate Democrats.
Right, chief economist for the Senate Democrats. And she basically said that inflation, you'll always be able to find what industry is causing that inflation and then be able to deal with those industries on a case-by-case basis. Exactly. So to me, that is like they just will pick energy. Oh, yeah. She also said that energy is often where it results from. Right. So they could just pick, okay, energy industry. We got to regulate that so that we can stop this inflation. So it's just another kind of control panel for them to decide how the economy should run. This is 21st century socialism right here. And it is horrifying. And then the other reason why I think that I would put money on it, that this is the track that they'll eventually be going in 5 to 10 years, it's the path of least resistance.
Yes.
I mean, do you see like Bernie Sanders in that first debate, like struggling to basically explain why us raising taxes on middle class people would actually be good for you? This removes that from the conversation. You don't have to endorse raising taxes on people to pay for these programs. Under modern monetary theory, just print it.
Like I said, you can cut taxes.
Right.
You can say we're going to provide single payer health care and all sorts of other benefits, free college tuition. We're going to cancel everybody's student loan debt. We're going to give away all these wonderful benefits, and we're going to give you a tax cut. We're going to do all of it plus a tax cut. And because we don't need the money from taxes to pay for anything. It's so crazy. It is so ridiculously crazy. But the reason I believe, but it's so alluring if you're on the left. It's an idea you want to believe can work, because if it does work, then it provides you the answer to all of these questions you've had to, all these questions that have been thrown at you for decades and decades and decades about how are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for it? They don't have to answer that question anymore. Right. It is just, it's amazing. It's, you say like, well, it sounds too good to be true. It's so obviously too good to be true. And yet politically it's so powerful that I just don't think that they'll be able to resist it. I think eventually this will become the norm for the Democratic Party. They will all be walking in lockstep, maybe within the next 10 years, 15 years, something like that. They'll all be walking in lockstep.
The way they're going now, it'll be next month.
Well, yeah. I mean, Bernie Sanders has already, I think, totally adopted this idea. I think he's totally adopted
it. He wants to punish the rich. Like, that's his thing.
Well,
that's part of it. That's part of this.
But he was conceding that he was going to have to raise taxes on middle class. So because only by a tiny amount. It's like a 4% tax or something. I think that's an illusion. I think he's doing that because he doesn't want to have to answer the questions that now Kamala Harris has to answer. About how you're going to pay for it. Yeah, let's get to that, because I think that and then some of the quotes from AOC, those are the people that are like flat out adopting this. Okay, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she was heckled at a town hall meeting where somebody's like, how are you going to pay for this? After she like rambled off a list of all these things that the government should give people. And she's like, started basically yelling at the guy and like how we have to get out of the scarcity mindset and stuff like that. And it's just like scarcity is the backbone of what capitalism is. It's trying to allocate scarce resources like as best as possible. So if she doesn't even believe that, like the cornerstone of what economics is, then yeah, she's buying into this modern monetary theory. Okay, yeah, let's jump into the Kamala Harris thing because yeah, this is kind of crazy. You brought this up to my attention, so I'll let you kind of take it away. Start off with the CNN interview.
Yeah, so Kamala Harris had an interview with CNN, and one of the things very recently, within the past week, and one of the things that came up at that interview was her position on healthcare. And there's been some confusion about exactly what she supports and what she doesn't support and whatever. So we don't need to get into that, but she was asked specifically about single payer healthcare. What do you support in regards to single payer healthcare? And she basically said that she supported Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All plan. Now, one of the things that came up, though, was, well, how do you plan on what is the difference really between you and Bernie Sanders? And how do you plan on paying for this? And essentially what she said was that she does not believe that the middle class should have to pay for any of single payer healthcare. They should not receive a tax increase at all for single payer healthcare. So then when she was asked, well, then how do you plan to pay for it? She said, well, we're going to tax Wall Street and we're going to tax some financial services. And we have to get out of this mindset. Notice that that's like a very common thing that the left likes to say, right? We've all been living in this. We're all a bunch of idiots who have been living in this, economic stupor for hundreds of years where we
socially constructed.
Yeah, this ridiculous. This ridiculous concept of debt and paying for things and all of that's all insane. We have to get out of that mindset and start looking at this as an investment in our future. We're going to get something back if we invest in single payer health, which on its face, okay, maybe you could make some kind of an argument about that, but that doesn't explain how you're going to pay for it. That just says that it's worth paying for. That's not an answer to the question at all.
That's just basically a way of saying we're putting it on the credit card.
Yeah, well, right. And that's the point. She did not ever answer the question, except she said, we're going to tax Wall Street and we're going to tax financial services. Now, to give people an understanding of what we're talking about, just how absurd and ridiculous that whole idea is, Medicare for All, at the very, very least, is going to cost $32 trillion in 10 years. At the very bare minimum, $32 trillion. That is actually a very low estimate. It's probably going to be more like $38 trillion in the first 10 years because the $32 trillion figure assumes we're going to pay doctors Medicare reimbursement rates and hospitals basically lose money on Medicare patients. So every hospital in America or most hospitals in America would go bankrupt as a result of that idea. But let's just assume it's $32 trillion. You would need, in order to pay $32 trillion, you would basically need to double taxes for everybody to come up with $32 trillion. Okay. You would actually have to more than double taxes to come up with that $32 trillion. And Kamala Harris is saying, we don't need to raise taxes on the middle class. We can just raise taxes on the wealthy. Even if you were to confiscate every single penny owned by every single billionaire in the United States, every penny, I'm not talking about taxes. I'm saying if you literally took their house from them, all their personal property, you sold it all off, all the ownership they have in stock, everything, and you took every penny from them, it would be about $3 trillion, probably a little less than $3 trillion. That's not even 10% of what it would cost to pay for single payer healthcare in just the first 10 years. If you were to take every penny from every billionaire in the entire world, if you just ran around the world taking every penny from every billionaire, it would be less than $10 trillion. So that's not even a third of the cost of what it would be for single payer healthcare in 10 years. So the idea that we can somehow raise taxes on the super wealthy and that this is somehow going to pay for this is totally insane. In fact, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said, well, we can fund the Green New Deal, which is even more expensive than just single payer healthcare, by raising taxes on those making $10 million or more to 70%. We raise the tax rate to 70% on those people, and we can fund all of these programs. the Tax Foundation did an analysis of that, and they found that at best it would raise $300 billion with a B over 10 years. That's not even 1% of what it would cost to pay for just single-payer healthcare. So when you hear these people get up there and say, hey, we can pay for it just by taxing Wall Street, taxing the wealthy, creating a 1% wealth tax, all this stuff, it is so far from reality. It is so delusional that I have to believe that they know that. There's no way that they could be confused and think, oh yeah, we could just raise taxes to 70% and that would pay for all of this. It's not even 1%. So they're either just totally stupid and they have no idea what any of this stuff costs, which I don't believe. I think it's more likely that they know that there's no way they can pay for it. But by throwing these ideas out there, because the average person walking around, they don't know any of this.
And they're not going to fact check it.
And they're not going to fact check it. So they believe that. And that goes back to what I was saying before about Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders admitted that he would have to raise taxes on the middle class, but his taxes on the middle class are very small. It's not nearly enough to pay for everything. I think that was deliberate, because when someone asks him that question, how are you going to pay for it? He's not going to say, well, we're not going to pay for it. And he's not going to say, well, I'm just going to make Wall Street pay for it, because no one's going to believe that. Instead, he says, well, we're going to have to increase taxes just a little bit. But don't worry, you're going to be better off anyway, because you're going to get all these wonderful benefits. And people will believe it because they think, well, yeah, I guess if everybody had to pay 4% or something for a payroll, maybe that would come up with enough money. I don't know. But in reality, when you actually do the math, it's not even like it's like a tiny fraction of the amount of money. So I think it's all just a ruse. The truth behind all of this is modern monetary theory. That's what I think. I truly believe it, because again, if your whole plan is to raise taxes and it's not even going to pay for 1% of one program that you're calling for, then then obviously that's not your plan to pay for it. You have to know that. So what is your plan? The plan is we are just going to print the money. That's the plan. We're going to print the money and we can pay for it, and it doesn't matter. It's all an illusion. It's all a fiction. We don't really care about taxes and paying for things and national debt. None of that matters anyway.
Well, I don't think most people do either. I mean,
to some degree, yes. To some degree, I think you're right.
Most people can't pay a $400 expense out of pocket. So we have like an entire country full of people who are financially illiterate and electing people who are even more financially illiterate, but they promise them free stuff.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the topics. This is one of the things that we kind of bring up all the time, where it's like when you're talking about these massive numbers and stuff like that. I mean, when you put it in like certain terms like this, where you're talking about like these proposals don't even raise 1% of the revenue that you're suggesting that we can potentially get. I mean, I think some of that kind of seeps through, but these numbers are so large that they border on abstract, which I think is why the book behind me here, Socialism is Evil, is so appealing, because it kind of takes out all that economic, out of the debate. It's just focusing on, even if it worked, it is still at its core evil. But yes, I do agree that I think modern monetary theory is the track they're going. That tax foundation piece that you referenced, that will be in the show notes, is really interesting, because they were saying that at best they're responding to a Washington Post article that suggested that a top rate of 70% could raise as little, basically a little more than $700 billion over a decade. But according to their analysis, kind of focusing in on some of the incentives that would be created for people to kind of shift their money around, all of the different stuff that would happen, that yes, at best, $300 billion, at worst, $51 billion.
Right. But let's say it's $700 billion. That's 2%. Right, I mean, it's not like it makes any difference. I mean, the truth is they can't pay for it. Like, that's the reality. That's not like, this is so much money. This is going to cost so much money. There is no conceivable way to pay for it. You could confiscate all the wealth you want. You could raise taxes as high as you want. You can make taxes 90%. You can make taxes 95%, 100%. And then you could create some law that says that rich people can't leave America or we're going to shoot them. You could do anything you want, and it will not raise $38 trillion or whatever it is that you need, unless you're taxing the heck out of middle-class people. That's the only way you're going to pay for this.
So the target of our project, Stopping Socialism, is younger audiences, right? So they are the people that are embracing these delusional concepts more than anybody else. And I think the article that you sent our way, Isaac, would be kind of the best thing to describe it. This is a poll. This is a poll that interviewed or surveyed 10,000 plus undergraduate students in college about their majors and their political views, basically. So do you want to say what you thought were the biggest findings of this? Or do you want me to read off some of it?
Yeah, why don't you do it?
All right. So the biggest, the headline thing here is that philosophy majors, 78% of philosophy majors have a somewhat or very favorable opinion on socialism. 78%. And then basically anthropology is kind of on its doorstep at 64%. English majors are still north of 50%. International relations, more than 50%. Sociology majors are 57%. I think the first time we get... Nope. Music is also 57%.
51%. Yeah. No, this thing drives me nuts.
This is insane.
Then eventually you get down to law and criminology, like 28%. Economics is like what, 26%. Finance, 18%. And accounting, God bless accounting. It's like 18%.
Like 17.
Yeah.
Isn't it amazing the people who study like accounting,
numbers,
like people who study finance and actually understand how things work, like they're the people least likely to support this because they're like, this doesn't make any sense. They're the only people who should be qualified to even answer this question.
There is an inverse relationship between your prospect of getting a job in your field and your view of socialism. I mean, when you look at this, accounting, finance, economics, law and criminology, pretty practical majors, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And then you get up to philosophy. What are you gonna do with a philosophy degree besides be a barista at Starbucks?
Or teach philosophy.
Right.
Yeah, well, that too. But there's like 8 jobs for that.
Right. I think
that's why no student loan forgiveness, Justin. They must suffer.
We are not getting back into that.
Why do you think I emailed this? This was a backdoor plot.
Economics, finance, and accounting. I think the only people that are very favorable are the ones that went to Bard College and were taught by people like L. Randall Wray and Pavlina Charneva.
Yeah, well, AOC is in that like 8% that's very favorable to socialism.
I also think it's important because Donnie and I have been talking about this a lot lately too, the sort of personalities with socialism. And one of the big personality types in socialism is authoritarians. You have this sense of like, better than everybody else. And that if only you were in charge, you would make the world a better place. If everybody just listened to you, then it would make the world a better place.
Right.
And I think that the further up you get into these esoteric sorts of things, I think the more likely you are to find those kinds of personalities. So you study philosophy or something like that, you're maybe more inclined to think, you know what, if only I'm studying the great philosophers of the world, I know so much about how the world works and how humans think and everything. If only I were in charge of everything, like I could make the right choices. And that makes sense because you're studying a bunch of people who are trying to answer that question. Historically, that was one of the primary questions that people asked is how do we deal with people? How do we make society better from a top-down perspective? It's not until you get much later on in human history that you start having people say, hey, maybe top-down approaches don't work. Maybe we shouldn't do that anymore. But it makes perfect sense that you would find that. And sociology is, that was one of the top ones. That is a field that many people say Karl Marx started as sociology. So these are all, it is not surprising at all in one sense. And Isaac is exactly right. I think the more practical you are about things, the more you live in the real world, the less likely you are to think, we could just print an infinite amount of money and pay for everything, and it doesn't really matter. The more you live in the real world, the less likely you are to believe that. The less you live in the real world, the more you live in a world in academia where people get paid and get job protection based on how long they've been around. And then you can't fire anybody after they've been there for a certain number of years. And your whole purpose in life is to teach other people this discipline that no one can actually use in the real world to make any money. That's your sole purpose. The more likely you are to find people who think, yeah, this is a great idea. We should just have the printing presses turned on at the Treasury Department and just print an infinite amount of money and then turn all these little knobs and pull all these levers and control everything from Washington, D.C. If we just put the geniuses in society in charge of everything, we'd all be better off. It makes perfect sense that you would have this way of thinking.
Isaac, I know I kind of teased it at the front of this podcast, but the thing you were working on, maybe we can save that for next week, because I think that is a very important topic that coincidentally, Justin and I were talking about before. So are you cool with that?
Yep.
All right. So we'll save that. It's an energy related topic, but we only have a few minutes here, and there's not necessarily an update on our Democratic candidate survivor pool. But Andy, if you want to pop that on the screen, there is some potential news going on here, going around on Twitter, apparently. And if you're not this, all the Dem survivor pool going, where we drafted all of the different characters, characters running for the Democratic nomination for president, and it looks like John Delaney might be the next one out. Who, if we can get this up here, I think Jim has him. Yeah. So there was a story going around that people in Jim Delaney's camp are trying to convince him to drop out of the race. So if that's the case, then that means that he would be the second one to drop out. First one was Eric Swalwell, which was Justin's pick.
Stupid guy. I hate that guy.
So maybe by the end, I mean, I haven't Googled it until prior to this episode, but John Delaney could be the next one out. And apparently Beto and Mike Gravel are also having issues that might result
but
in
Mike
them dropping
Gravel
out soon.
ever not having issues. His whole campaign is I'm gonna film a commercial of me throwing a rock into the water, and I'm gonna hang on until the very end.
I saw this. It's funny you mentioned Beto or Beto or however the heck you say it.
Beta.
I saw this. I saw this poll recently that was taken. It was like a straw poll that they did in New Hampshire. And I think it was St. Anselm's, which is like a very big political science program that they have there in New Hampshire. They're really big in presidential politics. They often host presidential debates and stuff like that. They did a straw poll, I think. And I think they said that Beto O'Rourke had 0% in the poll that they did. Like literally nobody chose him.
That's amazing.
I mean, that's just incredible.
So my question to the panel is, who is next to drop out?
Oh my gosh.
Maybe by next week when we're doing episode 201, we'll have an answer to this. But first one to answer gets their pick. The next person, you can't pick whoever you think is going to. So feel free to jump in, Andy.
John Delaney.
Okay, all right. He's going with the low-hanging fruit.
Of course I'm going with the low-hanging fruit. I'm here to win.
Gentlemen?
I think Beto.
Beto?
And the reason why is because I think early on you tend to get the people who thought that they had a chance, but then realize that this is just a money suck and they're losing all this money, and so they want to get out. And I think that's Beto. He probably has a lot of money sitting in his Senate fund, and he probably doesn't want to burn through all that running for office when he knows he has no chance. So I think as soon as it looks to him like he has no chance, he's out. And I think we're really close to that happening.
Isaac, you got somebody?
Yeah, I think I'm going to go with Hickenlooper.
Hickenlooper. Okay. All right. So we've got John Delaney. We've got Hickenlooper over here. And then you're going with Beto. Justin, I will go with, he's not on here. He started his campaign after we drafted, but I'm going to go with Tom Steyer.
I was wondering if that was your move.
Yeah, Tom Steyer. I think he might be out for the same reason.
He wasn't even invited to the debate.
Now,
for the
his
most
camp-
recent debate.
His camp did release a response saying that it was his first month and they're not even shooting for this debate. But of course, that's what you say.
Sure.
Make it. So
Yeah,
let's
right.
put a big asterisk on that.
The second night of this debate will be on Milton Friedman's birthday, July 31st. So
Great.
there's some irony there. I'm sure he'll be rolling in his grave. But all right, gentlemen, any words of wisdom, any anecdotes, any jokes, anything you want to get off your chest before we sign off for the week?
Yeah, I got some words of wisdom. You spell my name ISAAC, not ISSAC, folks.
Who did that?
Where did I
Look at the board.
Oh, that's Jim's
Stupid
fault.
candidate board.
Jim at a Renaissance.
Low energy
No, he's at
Jim.
space camp. He's at space camp.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
I think we should take his president title away from him.
we will be
Misspelling
Interim.
names.
All right. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the In the Tank podcast. Join us every Friday for a new episode. If you would like, you can follow us on Twitter at In the Tank Pod. If you like our show, please subscribe, rate, a review for us on iTunes. You can also find us on SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, pretty much everything nowadays. Also on YouTube, of course. If you want to send us your comments, suggestions, questions, or just want to be in there for our free little book giveaway, email us at inthetankpodcast@gmail.com. Isaac, where can the fine people find you?
Weren't we going to have John Nodrift on for episode 200?
We thought about it. He's too busy selling Windex or something.
Oh, okay. Folks can find me at The Fracking Guy on Twitter and at AmericanExperiment.org.
Justin, where can the fine people find you?
Facebook and more importantly on Twitter at Justin T. Haskins. Look for the big blue, beautiful check mark. Also, ladies and gentlemen, an update. We are increasing. The followers are increasing.
All right, mute up. All right. Thank you all for joining us, and we will talk to you next week.